Of course I can survive in a world like we see in A Quiet Place. I can be silent for a very long time. I can prove it to you. Throw up a timer in the corner of the screen. Just a little hungry. Do you want a kind bar? Do these interest you? Eat this first. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review of one of my most anticipated movies of 2021, A Quiet Place Part 2. A huge thank you to Paramount for providing an in-person screening opportunity for this movie, guys. I saw it at a Dolby theater at my local AMC, and let me tell you something. If you can safely make it out to theaters, I really recommend seeing this in a movie theater setting. Trust me, it begs for that big screen experience. The movie is a direct sequel to that 2018 classic, A Quiet Place, and it's written and directed by John Krasinski and stars Emily Blunt, John Krasinski himself, Millicent, Simmonds, Noah Jupe, and Cillian Murphy. And trust me, there are some other supporting actors here, and gosh, this cast is so stacked, and I'm so happy that all of them were able to be given a certain amount of importance within the story. And speaking of the story, guys, no spoilers of course, but let me talk a little bit about how this film plays into this world. The sequel began with a minor flashback, but the story picks up right where we left off from A Quiet Place. But this time, the Abbott family isn't alone. They run into Emmett, who will help them try and fight for survival and hopefully to save the rest of the world. At least the rest of the United States. We don't really know if the creatures are worldwide yet, but guys, this film is something special. Now, before we dive into what I liked and what I didn't like too much about Part 2, if it is your first time here at the channel, welcome to Real James, where I love talking about movies really like this all the time. So if you love talking about them too, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and help us get to 5,000. We're almost there, and it's all because of your love and support. Smash that thumbs up button if you're a fan of A Quiet Place, and if you're excited to see this one, and go ahead and get loud down below, and let me know, guys, what did you think of A Quiet Place Part 2? Are you happy with it, or are you a little disappointed? Alrighty, y'all, well, you know what? Let's get into my positives, but before that, I need to preface it with this. I really wish I never saw any trailers for this movie. It unfortunately ruined and spoiled the entire first act for me, and yes, I was calling the shots for the first 20 or 30 minutes, but after that, guys, thankfully, nothing else was spoiled. Alrighty, guys, so let's get into my positives for A Quiet Place Part 2, and we're starting off with this, guys. The sequel does everything that the first film did well, but on an even grander stage. I'll just go ahead and say it, guys. A Quiet Place Part 2 is much better than Part 1 simply for the fact that John Krasinski has shown that he's grown as a director and a writer. There's an emphasis on our characters and their interactions, and I love that so much more than just, hey, don't make a sound and the creatures are around every corner. Instead, we really get to learn a lot about our characters, and the development here is so real, and that also adds to the stakes, which are much more challenging for our characters, and everything just felt so much more visceral and emotional. And when it comes to each and every conversation, there's an incredible amount of emotion that I did feel that resonated more effectively here than in the first movie, and there's one actor that proves my point that we'll talk about in just a little bit. There's also an incredible amount of tension here in the sequel. Yes, I do think it's more tense than the first film, but that's really because of the challenges that are presented, and some of those challenges have nothing to do with the creatures that our characters run into, and I think that is super cool. And the jump scares, guys, the jump scares were just so much more effective. Yeah, your boy jumped a little bit. Okay, I jumped several times, more times than I like to admit. But I had my eyes glued to the screen for an hour and 37 minutes, and it didn't even feel like that long at all. It was an incredibly well-paced movie, and I do feel like the writing and direction was just so much better here than in the first film. Now, we gotta talk about the sound design, the score, and the cinematography, because all three of those technical areas were amplified in this sequel. I was a huge fan of how all of the sounds were taken from a 10 to an 11 here, which made every step, crack, or even possible noise that could have been made to attract the creatures much more terrifying. And I absolutely love that Part 2 continued that trend of putting us in the perspective of each main character. For example, when we're running with Lee, we hear all of the destruction, all of the noise, but when it transitions to the perspective of Reagan, we start to hear muffled noises or no noises at all. So it's really neat that they do play with sound design like that. Think of Sound of Metal, just, toned down a little bit, but I still will say that Part 2 does an amazing job in the sound design department. And then there's the score composed by Marco Beltrami, which was bone-chilling at times and really added to the intensity of scenes. Whenever our characters were up against the creatures, I got really tense. Whenever they were just simply walking, there's a little subtle string in the background that I was just really terrified of, and I don't know what it was, but it added to that atmosphere. And even when I sat through some of the end credits, Marco Beltrami's score I think is even better here than in the first film, and it's among one of the better horror compositions that I've heard as of late. And when it comes to the cinematography by Polly Morgan, I was in awe at some of the scenes that she framed. I didn't care for the previous film she worked on, Lucy in the Sky. we won't talk too much about that. My review's already on the channel for that one. But this film is framed beautifully. There were some amazingly detailed shots, and then some shots where you can tell she was just playing with her environment and the natural lighting of it all, and it made this experience much more immersive. Okay, y'all, so let's move on from what this movie did well technically and jump right into the acting. It should go without saying that Millicent Simmonds, who plays Reagan, the daughter of this family, did a great job in part 1, but here, I think she's even better, and she steals the entire movie. The way she conveys every bit of emotion, from sadness to anger to compassion, is simply unreal. And outside of Daniel Kaluuya's performance this year, I do think that Millicent Simmonds delivers the best performance of 2021 so far. I especially loved her conversations and the way the film pairs her up with the wonderful Cillian Murphy, who is still underappreciated in Hollywood. He plays Emmett, a survivor who crosses paths with Evelyn and her family, and honestly, at first I had to work into getting to like this character. I didn't really care too much for the character of Emmett at first, but once we start to learn what is aching him physically and mentally, we start to understand the core of his character, and you can tell there was a lot of care put into writing certain scenes for him, and especially in that third act. I mean, y'all, when I tell you I was rooting for Emmett, I was rooting for Emmett. Again, this is where John Krasinski has grown as a writer and director, where he knows how to get the absolute best out of the cast and their performances. And even though the film focuses less on Emily Blunt, who plays Evelyn, I think the few defining moments they gave her are earned. There's an insane amount of grief and sadness in her eyes, and she does a lot of that acting with her eyes, more so than she did in part 1. But I think she gives a good performance. However, the spotlight really was put more so on Millicent Simmonds, Cillian Murphy, and even at times Noah Jupe. But we really do feel that burden she's carrying of not having her husband, Lee, alive to help shoulder the load of surviving and protecting their family. And if you're curious, the movie does address life after his death and how she's coping with that too, so I won't say too much on that, but it does have a really nice ribbon tying moment where you can understand that, okay, this was a good character arc for Evelyn. And I know I just mentioned it, but there's Noah Jupe here in this movie, guys, someone whom I've loved in almost everything I've seen him in. He plays Marcus, and, well, let's just say he's very good at expressing pain. I was almost screaming alongside with him in that Dolby Theater. But man, he does an excellent job here. Again, he's growing into his own as an actor. However, I think the film does shift that focus away from him a little bit, because this really is, again, Millicent Simmonds' movie. However, he is a crucial part of one moment in this film that really took my breath away. There's something spectacular from a filmmaking standpoint that this movie does, where it draws direct parallels between what Reagan is going through and what Noah Jupe's character, Marcus, is going through. And I love the fact that there's this intercut, and it never felt too much. There was never a time where I thought, okay, there are too many interweaving storylines and there's just too much going on in this movie. Instead, I felt like it flowed and it fit the narrative, and it told a beautiful story by the end. So with all of this praise I'm giving A Quiet Place Part 2, guys, there are a couple of areas where I felt the film was still lacking a little bit. And that begins with the extended intro, and maybe that's because that sequence was spoiled for me in the trailer, and it still had a great effect, and there were some amazing shots inside of vehicles in this movie. But what I will say is that it didn't have as much of an impact, maybe because I knew what was coming. And even outside of that, guys, I still have this love-hate relationship with it, because I think it was just used to introduce a character and give us much more John Krasinski. And that's never a bad thing, trust me, but I almost feel like, as my friend put it right after the screening, this could have been used in A Quiet Place Part 1 instead of Part 2. At times, conversations were really tough to decipher, especially in the first act when we get reintroduced to Emmett for a second time. Everything sounded a little muddy, and I hate to say that, but I really was hoping that a film that literally is all about sound design would have nailed the sound mixing a little bit better. Thankfully, though, as the movie goes on, things get a little bit more clear, and I'm glad that even though I missed some important details in the beginning, I was able to put the pieces together to understand these important character moments towards the end. And y'all heard me talk about that supporting cast, which I still say is really good in this film, but I am disappointed with how they handled Jimon Hunsu. That's all I'll say. I can't say anything else, but honestly, Jimon Hunsu deserves so much more praise. He is so good in any capacity that you give him. But guys, that's all of the negatives I had, because A Quiet Place Part 2 was really, really effective as both a horror film and a character study. So overall, yes, of course you need to try and see this movie in theaters safely if you can. I don't recommend watching this at home for your first time. If you can honestly get to a theater, it is just so much better. There's an immersive experience that only a movie theater can provide for a film like this, and A Quiet Place Part 2 nails it. I mean, I said it before, guys, I'll say it again. This is better than the first film, and I gave the first film a 3.5 out of 5. I'm giving this one a 4.5 out of 5. Millicent Simmonds again gives one of the best performances of the year, and the set pieces are much more grand in scale, so it just shows how this movie took everything that the first film did well and improved upon it. And at this rate, I am watching anything with John Krasinski attached as a director because boy, he has an eye for film, and there's something so special about this movie and the way that it can convey emotion, and that I didn't even feel like it was nearly 2 hours. This is one film that I'm going to watch again in theaters because I cannot get enough of A Quiet Place Part 2. So guys, there you have it. That's my real review of A Quiet Place Part 2. Again, go and see this film. It is unreal, and yeah, it's a little scary. I didn't scream, but I might have yelped. If you haven't already, guys, go ahead and hit the big red button below and subscribe to the channel and tap on that bell so you'll stay up to date with any new reviews just like this, and smash that thumbs up button if you're a big fan of A Quiet Place. Alrighty, y'all. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening. And I'm gonna finish that kind bar now, alright? This thing ain't gonna scare me. Oh no, you brought your friend.